I've decided to keep a journal.
Hey, everybody, welcome to Pauled Casty for Me, the podcast about film, culture, politics, and Paul Schrader, where we watch every film written and or directed by American filmmaker Paul Schrader and explore how they speak to their moment. And this one, show's hosted by you guys. I'm one of the guys. My name is Jake Serwin.
I'm one of the guys. My name is Ian Ryan. I don't mean to turn this opening segment into a thing where I just talk about what you're wearing, but you look hot today, man. You look kind of put together in a distinctly Master Gardener type way, right? You get the long sleeves.
Well, thank you so much, Ian. I went to get a haircut yesterday.
That could be it. That could be it for sure. The hair's
I went to get
good.
my haircut by my buddy Ryan over there at the barbershop.
Okay.
And he was telling me that his girlfriend's out of town. So he had a buddy over.
Okay.
They got some pizza. They got some beers.
Sonic
and they stayed up watching
Adventures.
skate videos.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Now that
He's
is
like
how
40.
you do it. That's how you do it.
Ryan, who cuts my hair, is a he in addition to cutting hair, he's a pretty accomplished painter of like skateboarding scenes.
Oh, wonderful.
So, they have been in.
Do you mean like on a skateboard, or you just mean a scene about skateboarding? Okay, cool.
Well, I'm sure he's painted on a skateboard, but I found his website once, and it's like he'll paint his work. I think has appeared in like skate magazines and stuff.
Wow, wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's lots of ways to be an artist, and interestingly, he said that right now he's anticipating the release of a New Balance skate video.
Oh.
I remember when they were lightly in trouble for
for some of the stuff we're going to be talking about today. Yes. Okay.
Association.
Yeah, I wasn't sure what was interesting about that, but now you're right, actually.
I mean,
smart,
arguably nothing. But anyway, thank you for saying I look nice.
Yeah.
You look like you're wearing a t-shirt I've never seen before.
That might be true.
Have I seen this shirt?
I don't know. Can't remember.
It might be true.
Don't be keeping track of which t-shirts you've seen me in.
This is like what kind of a blue is this? I guess like a
robin's egg.
Might be. Yeah, it's
robin's egg blue, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a little. I would say more vibrant than that, but I'm also
that's definitely
maybe
wrong.
colorblind. I'm like my father is colorblind, and I'm always wondering if it's. Is there such a thing as late onset colorblindness? Let's bring our guest in. Real quick, if you'd like to support the show, head on over to patreon.com/podcasty for me. $5 a month gets you a bonus episode every other week. We are a little bit delinquent. We owe an episode. It's coming out very soon related to, well, when this comes out, it'll be out. So the episode that's coming out now is on Elmo and Grouchland, and I've just locked Ian into that.
Wow, cruel.
Anyway, check us out on patreon.com/podcasty for me. Our guest today, very excited to have him, is a writer and resident of New Orleans. Welcome to the show, Matthew Germenis. How you doing,
Hey,
Matthew?
Wonderful. Thank you guys so much for having me on. Long-time listener, first-time guest.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, no, all the way back to the Clint Eastwood days.
And you wanted to be on the show, even though you heard it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, like it was incredible. Like I discovered you guys because I've been doing a lot of like Clint Eastwood research for the past year, and so like while looking up stuff, I found out that like, oh, there just happens to be these two guys who were going through every single work of his on a podcast. I have to listen to them, and
I can't use any of this.
What
this
is
incredible.
Is it good? Which one is it? Yeah.
And I'll send you the link after after the episode. Yeah, and then. By that time, you guys were almost done. Like, I think you were already in the close to Mystic River by about the time that I discovered you guys.
Got it.
And then, so yeah, it was great to hear that you were then going over to the Paul Schrader world, who's also one of my favorites. Okay. And so, yeah, I'm just honored to be on here. Thank you.
Well, very glad to have you. And thank you for listening to the show. We're going to have to ask you to stop, but thank you for your patronage so far. What were we talking about? The shirt? Was it the shirt color?
Yeah, we're talking about the shirt. But
and then your father's color blindness.
Yeah, we pretty much closed the book on that as far as I can tell.
That's terrific. Yeah. You know, Matthew, you're wearing an Ingmar Bergman Cinemetal shirt.
Guest also looking good today. Maybe I just woke up on the right side of the bed. I got a real men's group feeling to myself.
Ian's got a very small tumor growing in the gay section of his brain. Yeah. That'd be cool, right?
Yeah.
Just a little switch over.
Be great.
not to sow too many clues, but those shirts originated at the video store where I used to work that I talk about all the time.
Oh.
So those shirts, listeners may also remember, I believe in Funny People, maybe. Seth Rogen is wearing the one that's a Werner Herzog, Glenn Danzig mashup. Yeah, those shirts were like invented by a guy who used to run that video store. So
wow,
that's really cool. I just picked up I just went back home to New York a couple of weeks ago, and I got the Almodovar Aerosmith shirt.
Yep.
Yeah,
nice.
Yeah, we were always trying to come up with new ones.
They should add more.
Yeah, I mean, it's you quickly kind of run out of good matchups. I'm trying to think of a Schrader one. I guess I don't. We'll think about it. We'll all noodle on it over the course of the episode. Great. Instead of sitting in silence trying to come up with a medium good joke.
But that would be the prayerful thing to do.
Exactly.
Just like
Is there something? Maybe it would have to be like a Christian band, but I don't know any of them that have logos.
What about Creed?
It's Schrader.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's not bad.
Yeah, something like that.
There's something there.
I don't know what Creed's logo is. I don't remember what it looks like, but
I think it kind of looks like I'm imagining something in the like Affliction aesthetic range. We'll look into it. Well, I do want to kick us right down into the muck here with a bit of a
muck farm.
Paul the News that's fit to Clint. This is the segment on the show where we check in on the latest updates in the worlds of Paul Schrader and Clint Eastwood. First of all, this is an exciting kind of liminal space where I have seen Juror Number 2.
It's true.
Holy shit!
Yes.
Really?
Yeah, he's one of the lucky few. Yeah.
Yes, one of the select, the elect, excuse me.
Yes,
whatever.
That's right.
One of the 108.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Wow. I'll never know God's grace, but it sounds wonderful.
I bathed in the blood.
Yep.
It's great. I mean, not to give it away, but I had a great time, and I'm excited to talk about it on the show.
I think this is good. We're sort of striking a nice collective balance of what the experience of probably some hardcore Clint heads who have gone to see it, and then the many who are suffering with me in the lack of knowledge.
You're down the purgatorio.
Yep.
Or whatever.
I'm seriously considering driving to Dallas.
Right.
To go see it.
This is what they're asking
like
of us.
8 hours? How long?
Yeah, it's 8 hours. Yeah, but I was gonna do like a Eastwood JFK trip.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, and do a whole pilgrimage. So
all right,
we've talked about doing that as well.
Yeah, we have.
And the anniversary is coming up in a couple of weeks.
It's true.
I thought that might be appropriate.
And I can say this now because the election is just a few days away. But if anyone is listening to this from the NSA, I guess there's
just
still
stop.
time. There's still time to. And I'm saying clear the board.
Yeah, sure. Just do a full reset.
I'm saying clear the board.
Give us another bite at the apple here. Yeah.
But also we don't have to hurt anyone. They can just be somewhere else. Just witsec them.
Yep.
In the movie. So that's exciting. And then on the Paul Schrader on the Paul Schrader front, I have of course a post from Facebook. Now, shout out to Ryan from Altmania for alerting me to this. This is a Paul Schrader post. I think it went up today or last night. And of course, he begins his post with an all caps kind of epigraph. Well, I don't know what would you call it. Yeah. The Shock of the Old. Immoral Tales by Valerian Borovchik appeared on Canopy. It seemed intriguing, so I watched. It's 4 bawdy, blasphemous historical tales featuring beautiful nude young people. Softcore of a highest order. Each breast paler and plumper that the last. The spelling error his. I was surprised that anyone had the guts to make such a film in this day and age. When it was over, I checked online. The film was made in 1973. Over the past 50 years, the film industry has relegated salacious narrative film fun to the internet. I don't think this is a filmmaker's choice. It's a viewer's choice. And then he's commented on his own.
He loves this.
He's added a little postscript that says, not a dong film. Now, I've been staring at my keyboard. The letters of porn and dong
No.
are not that far from each other, but they're not in the right order.
He said what he said.
He meant
but what if this, because he also said each breast paler and plumper that the last. So he'll just dash these thoughts off.
Maybe it was just maybe long and it was just a full Freudian slip.
Oh, okay. Long film could be. Yeah. I was thinking
I don't know.
It could also have been like a autocorrect thing, but I don't know why autocorrect
I don't think it does
Dom.
that. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure you can tell your computer anytime you type in porn to just switch it out for Dom.
Yeah, a lot of computers will do that.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure
I've
mine
been talking
does.
to my computer about this as well. Yeah, see if we can get this figured out.
Do you talk to your computer, Ian? Do you have any of the computers you can talk to?
Oh, no, I would never do that.
Yeah,
disrespectful to man and computer.
Matthew, are you a Siri guy?
Frustratedly so.
Okay.
Yeah, I think probably 70% of the time that I ask it something, I don't get the result I need.
Mm-hmm.
And then I spend so much time trying to find a way to get the result that I just type it in myself. So
hey, maybe computers are more human than we thought. This sounds
yeah, maybe they're fuck ups just like us.
Yeah.
If anyone is playing this out loud, hey Alexa, order a big diaper.
Okay. I mean,
expensive.
honestly,
expensive.
Yeah. Parentheses expensive. Yeah.
Yeah.
The highest quality.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
silk.
Yeah, this is kind of a non-prank. Probably something you could use at some time in your life. Cost like $8.
Just put it in the closet for later.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
you're gonna need it. Someone's
bad.
gonna need it.
Yep.
I'm sure a lot of from personal experience, I know that a lot of shelters and supportive housing places, they can always use diapers. So you know what? Hey Alexa, order 30 packs of baby diapers and deliver them.
More.
Yeah.
Deliver them to a homeless services organization of your choice, Alexa. And hey, you're doing a great thing, computer. That's what's up with Paul Schrader.
That's what's up with it. I mean,
not a dong movie.
This is disappointingly not a dong film. I believe there's no dong.
No,
there is not.
I think
There's dong in shadow.
Right. It called for a little bit of dong, I think.
Shadong.
In sort of the spirit of fairness to everybody involved. So, and we know that he's a guy who's not afraid to get somebody's gear on screen.
He's he's really famous for getting the gear out. Yeah.
So
Richard's gear.
Oh well. Now we're going to hear that Non-Compos Mentis is canceled and it's all for, what was it?
Right.
Beautiful
Immortal
young
Tales.
people.
Salacious.
Yeah. That film, by the way, a frequent rental from the video store, because I think Vinegar Syndrome or one of those horny boutique Blu-ray labels put it out. I don't know. That's fine.
Check out our friend Carly's wonderful essay in, I think it's Specchio Scuro is the magazine. And then she talked about the disappearance of eroticism from popular film.
That was a great article.
Yeah.
Great article. It's time for the two questions. This is our signature segment where we ask each other two questions. Matthew, were you able to come up with a question for us this morning?
Oh yeah, I've got one. You want me to go first?
Oh yeah.
Yes, please.
Okay. So, do you guys think do you agree that it is not okay to use a porta potty in public? I'm not talking about you're at a concert or some kind of a sporting event where there happens to be porta potties. I mean, for example, let's use a real life example. There's a lot of construction throughout the city and very much on my street. So there is a porta potty down the block from my house. And a friend and I had this discussion about, because we saw someone, not a construction worker, just a passerby, exit said porta potty. And so we had this conversation of like, if you're just walking around and you see a porta potty and you have to go, is it okay to use it? Because I think the answer is no. Like, I think unless you are, working on the job site, you shouldn't be touching it. Why would you even want to go near one, let alone inside one, and then use it? So am I weird? Am I the weird one? Or what do you guys...
Well, you've activated my extremely strong feelings about failures of public infrastructure. So
yeah, I was going to say this is...
I do have feelings about this.
The Ian signal just went up.
Yeah. Now, I agree with you, Matthew, that if you are somebody who has access to a bathroom and you are opting to use this, first of all, just on like a aesthetic experience and
that's
pleasant.
A paraphilia,
I mean, that's
some kind.
that's insane.
It's
behavior.
not very transcendental.
No, that's extremely spooky. But the thing is, in our public spaces, there are so few bathrooms, and this is where it becomes defensible, I think, because not just as like a person experiencing homelessness or something, but just as any person who doesn't want to have to go buy a coffee or something. You know, I can imagine that there are times where you're forced into this scenario. A child.
I agree with Ian, but I also am reminded of a similar debate about whether you can throw your trash away in someone's city
I
bean.
think you absolutely should be able to do.
Well, yes, but there's a caveat that I think applies here.
Is this about crimes?
No, this is about whether it's on the street. Because I don't think you should go up someone's driveway. First of all, for your own safety. Don't go up the driveway of a
castle
homeowner.
Doctrine.
Yeah. But if it's on the street, I think that's perfectly fine, especially because there is a huge dearth of safe, publicly accessible garbage receptacles. And so I think it's better in someone else's trash can than on the street.
Absolutely.
But similarly, I would worry about entering a hard hat area without a hard hat because I don't want anyone to get a head injury or get yelled at or risk the whatever license of a union construction crew because somebody without a hard hat wandered into the hard hat area to blast a deuce.
Yeah, I think Matthew, you're talking about being in New York. I feel like it's a real New York experience to sort of not be certain if you have crossed the line. People are looking at you kind of weird, like, am I in a construction zone?
Yeah.
Nobody told me.
Which you always are. Like, I feel like no matter what, like and therefore, like, you're always having to question the boundaries of what you're doing.
Yes.
Like, you're always, thinking of yourself in that kind of, like, double social consciousness of, like, what are people thinking that I'm doing? What does it look like I'm doing? What am I actually doing? And that is such a nerve-wracking experience that I'd rather just either, I don't know, piss myself or just really hold it until it hurts.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this, as Ian said, I think just highlights the need for permapotties throughout the city. The city and the rural landscape as well. Shout out to the guy from Perfect Days, the Wim Wenders film.
Yes.
Shout out to all those
huge shout out to these guys.
Built. But they built those for the Olympics, for the Tokyo Olympics. So that's sort of a problem.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, if we had more of those, like, that would be a great answer to... Because I totally agree. Like, you shouldn't have to buy something just to relieve yourself. And people with families, people who, like, can't afford to buy like a $7 latte or whatever just to take a piss, like, it's the same with, like, why do you get charged for water anywhere?
Right.
Like, basic life things. So we should have those bathrooms.
Yeah, we cracked it. And then if you're worried about someone using the bathroom to shoot up, first of all, mind your own business. Second,
exactly,
provide safe injection sites and substance abuse support, and also give everyone a job and universal basic income so they have less to try to escape with intravenous drugs.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But those are, I don't want to tell anybody not to do intravenous drugs, except just be careful, I guess.
Yeah, and we care about you, and they're maybe not the best for you, but we get it also.
No. Yeah. Have you tried
taking your socks off? Okay.
Oh, yeah, taking your socks off, rubbing them on the carpet. Yeah, there's other stuff you can do. We encourage you to experiment with different ways of getting through the day until you find one that's lower risk to your safety. That's what I would say.
That could be a segue into the movie, but we still have one more question.
We can't segue into the movie.
We can't. Not yet.
Ian, do you have a question for the two questions?
Yeah. I got one.
Okay, please.
Yeah. What are you guys doing for your charity auction? What services and or goods are you going to sell to raise money for? Could be Meals on Wheels. Could be something else.
This is a great question. I mean, I'm great at putting together flat pack furniture, but I think if you're giving to a charity auction, you buy pre-assembled furniture.
Yeah,
so
that's a good point.
I take that back.
Okay.
I don't want to say you could come on the show because who would want that? No offense, Matthew.
No.
That's okay.
Who would pay for that? Let's say that.
In this economy.
That would be criminal.
Yeah. You know what? I'll take you around on a tour of filming locations in Los Angeles. I'll drive you around.
Sure, that's something people pay for.
Yeah, and I'll say that's the house from Nightmare on Elm Street, and that's a lot of people think this is the diner from Pulp Fiction, but it was actually in like Hawthorne, and it's not there anymore. That kind of stuff. So that's what I'm offering.
Great.
What about you, Ian?
Well, if our guest has an answer, he can go first there.
Yeah. What about you, our guest?
This is a tough one. Okay, so like in this scenario, do I have access to zoo animals?
Totally insane question, but sure, yeah, everything's possible.
Okay, so
what do you mean access?
Access, like
I guess finish your thought, and then we'll
for like meet and greets. Like
MEET.
Yeah. We're not eating the zoo animals, but like if you're like, I've always wanted to hold a sloth, or like take a picture next to a giant tortoise who's been around since Abraham Lincoln was alive. Like something like that, where
allegedly alive.
Allegedly, yeah. Like, yeah.
And you see yourself as kind of a facilitator in this role.
Yeah, exactly. Like, so that way it's done safely, so that the animals aren't stressed out, and that people, like wash their hands. They like do the little clean thing with their shoes, so that they like disinfect them before you go into like an aviary or something.
Like the end of The Departed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We would all dress like Mark Wahlberg, and then we would go in, and then you would like safely meet animals that don't need to be drugged in order to see you. So no like tigers or anything like that. Like more like docile. Like, have you ever wanted to meet like a caribou? Stuff like that. I
didn't really consider that I could presume expertise I don't have currently. For this, but that's innovation. I want to change my answer, but I can't. I'm locked in now.
That's too bad.
A good answer, Matthew. I might be donating, might be bidding, $10-15
all the money that you're raising. Yeah.
I'm not terribly liquid, but
your charity goes to funding my charity. So
exactly.
Yeah, it works out.
I'm going to be honest with you, that's often a lot of how it works.
Real charity scenarios,
Yeah. Ian, what about you?
I could give a real answer of presumably I would be offering something related to sustainable design, agriculture type stuff. I guess I could also teach, but teaching is something you can get at a low enough price that I don't think people would pay charity prices for it. Matthew style answer. One-way trips to space for the rich people that are donating, and they.
I like that.
I really sell them on it. Like this, you're finally going to be free of all these people trying to put trash in your trash cans on the curb.
What do you want to die on Earth?
Yeah, exactly.
You're gonna do it somewhere.
Yep.
That's great. Would it be like the gravity thing where you just launch them and they just keep going?
This could
and
actually
going
be
and going?
good, sort of a challenge. I could, all these guys are
right.
masculine weirdos, so I could tell them that like this is the final
What's
frontier.
Up? I'm Mr. Beast. This is the escape velocity challenge. I've never seen a Mr. Beast video, so I don't know if he says "What's up? I'm Mr. Beast."
I hope he does.
Yeah.
He probably does. That guy. I got a pair of pruning shears I'd like to show. Anyway, speaking of which, thank you for the questions, gentlemen. Let's talk about our film today. This is Master Gardener. It was originally titled The Master Gardener, but
they thought it was cooler.
Yeah, Schrader met up with
Justin Timberlake.
Yeah. Directed by Paul Schrader, released May 19th, 2023. Film stars Joel Edgerton, Sigourney Weaver, and Quintessa Swindle, who
I think it's maybe
uses
Swindell.
they them.
They do,
no, it's Swindle. They use they them pronouns, so I'm going to do the same. And if anyone listening gets confused, that's why we're doing that.
Although the character is a she, so I'm hoping we'll just try to keep it straight.
We're gonna do our very best.
Yep.
And Matthew, what's your relationship with this film and with Paul Schrader generally? You said you're a fan.
Oh yeah. So I got to see all three of this trilogy in theaters, and like each one progressively just blew me away. And these are three of my favorite movies from the past, 6 years, I guess, going back to First Reformed. As far as, Paul Schrader is concerned, no surprise or shock to anyone. But Scorsese and Bergman are my two like favorites of all time. And so to have someone who kind of like fits somewhere in between both of them has always appealed. And so, you know, not just his scripts for Scorsese, but, you know, movies like Light Sleeper have just been, and, you know, American Gigolo, like, you know, all the ones that you've covered, like they've, no matter how you feel about them, there's not another movie like them. Like there's just something so distinctly interesting and off, and like his own, just his own thing. Like you know when you're watching one of his films, and they're, I don't know, like it's, they're always so soul rewarding. And yeah, so like I've just always been a fan. But like I think these three, between First Reformed, Card Counter, and now Master Gardener, I would probably say that they're his best movies. Because I think that if he just stopped making movies, which would be an absolute shame, like I feel like this trilogy would be the culmination of an entire, not just a life's work, but a life's thinking and feeling. It all builds up, like everything comes together in these three movies. And I think especially Master Gardener is possibly the most powerful of the three, because of what it actually, not just what it's actually suggesting, but that it actually shows it happening. And that's the idea that grace is something that you can receive. And I think the other two films show kind of like the impossibility of grace. Like they both show transcendence. But I think this film, in a weird way, in a really interesting way, is anti-transcendent. But I think it's saying that you have to not transcend if you want to receive grace.
It's sort of the clumsy path forward. I see what you're saying. Yeah,
exactly. And because of that, I think it's very much the most hopeful. It's the most, it's the kindest, it's the gentlest, you know, which is insane for a movie about a former Proud Boy who is a known murderer,
going Anthony Napoli mode on two women from the same family. You guys remember that guy from Nathan For You, who was the guy that Nathan hired as the host of his like Bachelor ripoff, who then just volunteered that he'd had a threesome with a mother and daughter.
Yep.
I was thinking about that guy during the movie.
Sure.
I often am. Yeah. I mean, you're far from the only person who feels this way about this film. I will say, personally, I didn't dislike the movie at all, but I found it not as compelling as the first two. This is the one that I didn't see in a theater. I saw the first two theatrically. I saw this one on a Blu-ray. A fairly lousy looking Blu-ray, I should say. Somebody needs to do their job. But I was less blown away by it, but I am excited to be further sold on the film.
Okay.
Ian, what did you think about this?
Well, I'm a extremely careful adherent to trying to place myself in the hype cycle at the correct moment for my film viewing. And I do feel like I did this correctly. I also hadn't seen it until we started the podcast. And I had only basically heard bad things about it. And I'd heard that it was the worst of the three, and that blah, 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 the sort of things that people objected to that we'll get to in a moment, I'm sure. And then I watched it with those expectations in mind, and I thought particularly the first half was so much better than I expected it to be. I really thought it was, at moments, certainly better than the Card Counter for me. I agree that it's doing or trying to do interesting things. I do think it has flaws, and the ending I'm sort of mixed on. But I guess I gotta say, I was worried coming to this episode because largely the critical consensus on this is so shallow to me. I was really disappointed to read the way people talked about this movie like it was like Green Book or something. And I couldn't, I couldn't believe, even critics that I respect in other regards, just basically, I think, checked out on this. People make a big meal of sexist memes or like this "we should all be feminists" the shirt,
the t-shirt,
and no bad vibes.
Yeah, exactly. People, it really felt like the lowest hanging fruit that people wanted to go after, and I couldn't believe it in a movie that is just for starters so visually beautiful for most of it, that if you're not giving it the time of day just on that alone, I mean, it's fine. Anybody can check out on any movie. I'm not the movie police, but I do feel like if you're somebody who's going to take the time to talk about a film, if you're a critic, there's a certain amount of responsibility you have to try to engage with what's going on. If I can engage with Adam Resurrected, these professionals who are getting paid to talk about this movie, they can take a second to think about it. So I found myself coming to this episode prepared to defend a movie that I do think has issues, because I was worried that one or both of you would be in this position of brushing it off, but I'm relieved that we can have a real conversation about it.
Well, it's all been building to this.
Sure.
I'm no spring chicken when it comes to contending with Paul Schrader films. I'm in fighting shape.
Yeah.
I'm like an even number of professional punching men.
Yeah, in an old-timey one of those guys who used to have a professional boxing match like every 2 weeks somehow, and then died when you were 48.
Yeah. Jake the Animal Sirwin with like a leopard print singlet on.
Yeah.
And no one else is wearing a singlet in the boxing ring.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into it. Let's do a quick Ian Ryan plot summary.
Happy to.
If you don't mind.
Don't mind at all. Okay, so the film opens in extremely staid, but I do think it's sort of striking a balance visually between First Reformed and Card Counter. Card Counter is sort of austere and off-putting, and this I do think has sort of like a welcoming, transcendental light style to it. I don't know. We can talk about that, but we are introduced to this main character, Narvel Roth. Unusually named, and he is the master gardener at Gracewood Gardens, this sort of grand estate in the South, run by Sigourney Weaver, who seems to be the person who inherited this questionably historical Southern estate. And he is preparing the gardens for this big charity auction show. He seems like a very patient, deliberate leader of this team of mostly young people, a mix of backgrounds, and takes his job very seriously. We do discover fairly quickly that he was, like Matthew was saying, an active white supremacist in some type of far-right Nazi group. And he was also, we discover a little bit later on, doing like wet work for them, carrying out hits and this type of thing.
Not just on both on people of color and also other
like traitors.
Neo-Nazis.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. But for the most part, we're just watching him in his daily routine. He's doing the Schraderian journaling, and he is sitting in his very austere room. But I think in this case, like the other two cases, it makes sense to his character, right? He's this guy who has been sort of putting himself through the paces of absolution. His relationship is a little bit strange with this estate owner. He's like subservient to her, but also can push back. And then as the film goes on, we discover that maybe the relationship is even more complicated because he gets invited up to the house for dinner, kind of like help, but he's being attended by the help at the house. And then he has dinner with his boss, and then they go to bed together. And she is clearly aware of his past because he is tatted up with white supremacist tattoos, front, back, arms, on his beautiful chest, everywhere. This is Joel Edgerton, by the way. And then the complication comes in the form of Sigourney Weaver's character's grand niece, who has a complicated background and got in with a troubled crowd. Sigourney Weaver's character reveals sort of indirectly, she calls her grand niece somebody of mixed blood and kind of a Southern style gesture, and says that she wants Narvel to look after her, make her an apprentice, teach her horticulture and botany and these things, and also, get her on this like sort of minimum wage path to self-improvement. And he does that pretty capably and sort of like without much friction, except for the fact that Sigourney Weaver won't give this character, Maya, the time of day, despite her being her own grandniece. So she doesn't come down to visit her. She's been there for 2 weeks. And then finally they meet, and it's very fraught. It's clear that Sigourney Weaver's character has this racial condescension and class condescension and just general, I would say, Southern condescension to people who have suffered any kind of fall or like, had some type of unglamorous period in their life, and treats Maya as kind of semi-human or like a pet that she has to reprimand or something like this. And at the same time, between Narvel and Maya, there is kind of a romance brewing. The seeds of love are blossoming like the seeds of hate, and this is a little strange just because we don't get ages for these characters, but Joel Edgerton is a man who's 48 at the time of the shooting. And
was he really?
I think so.
Wow.
And Quintessa Swindle was 25 or something like this. So
yeah,
it's
and
not.
It seems like she's supposed to be playing like 20 to
20 something, a little bit older than 20. I think there's a line in the film about, and it's not. I mean, there's a moment where Sigourney Weaver gets jealous and says like, "Oh, I didn't realize you'd be playing out your little Humbert Lolita fantasy." So there's awareness of the age gap, but it's not like criminal. We can talk about that. And then, so she gets jealous when she finds out about their potentially blossoming romance, kicks them out. At the same time, Maya's been suffering because of her now deceased mom's drug dealer who's harassing her. And so Narvel tries to get help for Maya, and also tries to go threaten the RG, the guy who's hassling her, and he tries to get...
Yeah, before we saw him, because they kept saying RG, I thought, is this going to be Richard Gere playing himself?
Great question.
That would have been fun, right? He moves to New Orleans and starts selling drugs and beating up young women. Anyway.
And because I forgot to mention that Narvel's in WITSEC, like Jake referenced before, so he's reaches out to the cop who handles his case, or the marshal who handles his case, Asai Morales, and says like, hey, can you check out this drug crew? Can you threaten them so they leave Maya alone? Blah, blah, blah. And so now that they've been kicked out of the gardens, Narvel has to get Maya through some drug withdrawal stuff, give her some tough love. And then a little bit later, she sees his tattoos, or he shows her his tattoos indirectly. She's very upset by them.
He also had a history of drug use, right?
He did, yes. So which I think is why he sort of feels confident in this position. So she's very upset, obviously, by being a biracial person who was falling in love with this Nazi or ex-Nazi. And they sort of deal with that, or kind of reckon with it. And there's a sex scene that I'm sure we'll address. And finally, RG and his crew go to Gracewood Gardens while Narvel and Maya are not there, and they mess everything up, and they spray paint, and they destroy all the plants that Narvel had worked so hard on. So Narvel and Maya go hunt him down and threaten him with a gun, and Narvel breaks their knees with a ball-peen hammer. Not entirely. And then they leave together. And the conclusion is that they go back to Gracewood Gardens, and Narvel confronts Norma, Sigourney Weaver's character, and says, hey, we're going to come back. We're going to help you rebuild this. We're going to live together, Maya and I, as husband and wife. And Norma says this is obscene, but Narvel basically puts his foot down and says, no, it's not. We're going to be here. And then the film closes on a very... deliberate choice of a song playing over while Narvel and Maya dance together on the porch of their little cabin. And I think that's basically it.
That is the end of the film, Master Gardener. Now, people talk about this trilogy as like a man in a room trilogy.
Yeah.
They like to call it this. I cannot find anyone else on the internet. I'm not saying I came up with this. I'm the only guy who's come up with this. I'm having trouble finding anyone else saying, why isn't it called the Narvel Cinematic Universe? So if anyone listening to this has already made this joke, please email us, podcastforme@gmail.com.
We'll give you all the proceeds of this episode.
Exactly. We will. By the way, I do want to mention today's sponsor. We're going to sponsor today. Which is plants.
I was psyched to get this one. This
Love
is huge for me.
Yeah.
Just
they
to be
don't
on their
advertise
radar,
a ton.
you know?
Yeah, they don't do. It's like it's like Swarovski crystal or something. They don't need to advertise because people know about them. But plants are doing. If you want promo code Podcasty for me, go over there to Plants and tell them we sent you, and they'll give you
one free look. One
free look
taste.
At the plant. Careful which ones you're tasting. They will kill you. So first of all, let's talk about Narvel.
Okay.
The name Narvel. So his real name is Norton Replaya.
Yeah.
Which I guess sounds like it could be a white supremacist guy. I don't know. I've been reading about some reformed neo-Nazis, and they have all kinds of names. Narvel. Now that is a name I've not come across before. It is a name. Predominantly, there are two people named Narvel who are notable enough to have pages on the Wiki Encyclopedia. One of them is a guy named Narvel Feltz, who was a rockabilly singer whose greatest success was a cover of the song Reconsider Me. So that seems like, Schrader's a music guy. Yeah. That seems like it could easily be the source of the name. He was also known to fans as Narvel the Marvel for his beautiful falsetto voice. That's real. And then the other guy named Narvel is Reba McEntire's ex-husband.
Whoa.
Narvel Blackstock, which also interesting name, considering the discussion of racial breeding in the film.
Yeah.
So
now the only Narvel I also searched. I didn't find either of those two. I found Narvel Crawford. And we do.
Oh sure, yeah.
I think it was like a North Carolina House of Representatives person.
He was a Democrat from North Carolina, born in 1929. So he was almost confirmedly a huge piece of shit.
Yeah, but we do get a Johnny Crawford reference. Narvel plus Crawford forever for Norma. Could this be something? But I think your guess about Narvel Feltz is a good one.
Thank you. And then Roth, obviously a Jewish last name. So I was, or at least inclusive of Jewish families. So I assume that was maybe part of the cover strategy to hide.
I wondered that as well.
Yeah. Tim Roth, of course, will be appearing in, or he appeared in the film that we covered last week on what is sure to be our least listened to episode ever. There Are No Saints, a film from a Schrader script that no one has heard of, including us. We haven't heard of it. We did the whole episode on it.
Matthew, any Narvel feelings?
Yeah.
Narvel?
Yeah. I think it's really interesting that all of these figures that you've mentioned are people who are connected to very old Southern traditions and somehow. And this was something that I really wanted to get into because I think it's a major aspect of really understanding the movie is like what he's doing with names, because you have, with his name alone, you have this combination of really old Southern name. Like I've never met a Narvel in real life.
Right.
And I don't think I've even come across a reference to Narvel, and I've been living in New Orleans for 7 years now.
Yeah.
And I've never seen that name other than in this movie. And so between that and then you have the pretty common Jewish last name. So like even in the attempt to hide his white supremacist past, the first name refuses to let go of the very troubled racial history that comes along with that comes along with the Old South. And this is, we can get into this more later if you'd like, but also like the names of the locations.
Yeah.
The fact that the Gracewood Manor, that's not a real plantation. So it's this amalgamation of these two very real plantations in St. Francisville. There is Greenwood and Rosedown, and both of them are like an hour and a half away from where I am. Okay. And they're like, I want to say they're like kind of close to where like a lot of like plantation scenes are filmed, like for Django and like 12 Years a Slave. There's this like circle of former plantations that are pretty common for that. So even if you change those names, when you see Gracewood, you know it's a plantation. You know this is a place where, you know, for almost centuries, depending on what plantation it is, where like awful things happened.
Right.
You can't, like, you can change the name all you want, but you can't change the history. And I really think that that's one of the between Narvel changing his name, these plantations being changed, like the gang that he's a part of. RG calls him a Proud Boy, but they're not, like, they have like an official gang name.
Right, they do.
Well, it was like 6th Street something.
Oh, I think the RG was in the like 9th Street Downs or something.
Oh, no, I mean like the Proud Boys. Like there was like something 6th.
They did say something.
Yeah, something like that. What I found very funny was that he goes into witness protection to hide from white supremacists and gets the white supremacist haircut as part of his disguise.
Yeah.
Which he didn't have before. Before that, he just looked like a guy with, like, you know, shaggy hair and a beard. Yeah. Like, but
no, he looked like any guy from, like, you know, out in Louisiana.
Yeah.
Sure.
And then, which is really funny. I'm glad you said that, because I rewatched this yesterday with someone who had never seen it before. And when the first scene of him and Norma walking through the garden, and it's kind of like an extended walking scene. Yeah. She said, he looks like a Nazi. And I had to, like, cover my face because, like, the reveal hadn't happened yet.
Yeah.
She said, like, you know, the way that he carried himself and how, like, buttoned up he was. She was like, he looks like a, you know.
Well, so there's a few things going on with the film's treatment of race, just like from a production perspective. Because when he first wrote it, Schrader I don't know if he had written the script or if it was in the concept phase, but he wrote it as a film about a hitman he was like an ex-hitman who was in the witness protection program. And he was working on the script, and he said, this is from an interview that he gave to a magazine. He says, there's a console of hot buttons to choose from. That's a good line. You can be upset by May-December romance. You can be upset by Mandingo. We'll get to that in a second. You can be upset by Dirty Harry aspects. And you can be upset about the white nationalism. When I was working on the script and people were worried about the May-December, which used to be the norm and is now the abnorm, I think he means in film, they said they want me to tone it down and make the girl older. I said, I got a better idea. Why don't I just put another thorn on the vine? At that time, Norvel, I think they spell it wrong in the magazine, was an ex-hitman who was in the witness protection program. I said, I'll make him an ex-proud boy in witness protection. That way they'll get confused about what is most offensive to them. And then I thought, when I was casting, if we really want to get their heads spinning, let's cast, say it together,
Zendaya.
Kevin Spacey.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Oh, then they won't know how to get offended, because they'll be offended by too many different things at the same time. This is, I think this is CinemaScope magazine. They said, I guess the Kevin Spacey casting didn't work out. And he said, no, I don't think I would have got financing for that.
So now here's me wanting to push Paul Schrader into a lake in a non-threatening way, but just kind of like pretty disruptively to his day, because he's being so edgelordy and annoying.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's interesting. But I mean, it's not like he just did a swap with the background and then that was the only change to the script, because obviously the tattoos come in, and I think it clearly this enriched the story. But he also talks about, this is a different interview. He talks about how the Toronto Film Festival wouldn't accept the film. He's talking about Cameron Bailey, who ran TIFF at the time. I don't know if he still is. He said he couldn't put a film in the festival that treats racism so lightly. The film deals with racism, but it doesn't really deal with racism. It doesn't really deal with white supremacism. Certainly it doesn't really deal with gardening. It deals with a journey of the soul. And then, of course, you put those hot button issues in there and you do a reverse Mandingo. He's referring to the film. In the old plantation, the field hand or the kitchen girl were always prey for the white owner. Here we just reverse that, and the proud boy becomes Mandingo. So there is an interesting, like, class thing going on, and also, I guess, classes of racist, we could say, where the landed plantation owner woman, while she I think probably would agree with many of the white nationalists' biological opinions. She still clearly thinks less of this man because he was a drug user, probably didn't have as much money as she does, and was violent in a sort of vigilante way in like biker bars rather than by getting in the state house and like enacting violence through policy, you know?
Yeah, I want to address both that and what Matthew was talking about in terms of like Gracewood Gardens and these places that embody the racist American past and then sort of the different manifestations of American racism now. But very briefly, I just want to say that the things that I was getting upset at before, maybe I believe that Schrader deserves them a little bit more now. But what I was referencing is that the way people interacted with this film was sort of like Schrader made a really careless film about reconciliation or like a resolution of like getting over racism, and he doesn't really know what he's dealing with, and like his is beyond his powers. And to be honest, it felt like these people like had not seen the film, because I do agree to a certain extent that the film, like what we've been talking about for the last 3 episodes, Jake, is a film that is largely focused on like one man and one woman in their relationship, or 2 women and their relationships to each other and how that unfolds in their lives. And then it's using these other things as factors in those relationships. So I don't know. I was disappointed to hear that people thought that this was Schrader trying to talk about like how we get over our past or something, because I wasn't reading it as sort of this like sweeping allegory that teaches us the lesson of what America's future is going to be like. But I do want to say, now actually addressing, Matthew, your wonderful points, that the idea that you have this plantation, you have this place that almost as much as any place in the United States, like visibly reminds us of the slavery past. And you have a woman who now runs in this echelon of society, which is obviously the echelon that inherited the same aristocratic bloody history, but has become sort of more acceptable and in the popular imagination is focused on philanthropy and doesn't use the N-word anymore and doesn't engage in these obvious signifiers that would let us know that they're racist. And yet throughout the film, I think it's very clear that Norma is racist.
The sentiment is still there.
Oh, yes, exactly. And she's classist, like you're saying, Jake, in that she doesn't probably have to even worry about the white supremacy of Narvel. She maybe looks down on it for being tactless or something, or something that poor people engage in, but otherwise, you know, can use him as a whatever sexual partner or sex toy or however you want to characterize their relationship. But yeah, I think to me, the film is not trying to make some type of grand statement about what does it mean for a biracial woman who's maybe like sort of the future of America, struggling with her life. Can she accept these other people? Can she forgive? What does that represent for all of America? I mean, I think those things are in play, but I guess more specifically, it's about one part black person having to deal with one white person with a history of white supremacy, and also deal with her condescending white supremacist in a different way, relative. And what does that look like for just people trying to navigate? And here's where I agree with Matthew, also what you said about the messiness, the non-transcendental nature of this. Even though I think Schrader still makes some missteps, it comes across to me as, you know, what would this mean emotionally just for 2 people who are encountering each other? What would that process seem like to both of them? Is it possible for them to understand each other, etc.? So I don't know. I want to address these sort of like grand social historical things that we always address. But in this case, I sort of back Schrader a little bit in the sense that that stuff doesn't seem like something he's trying to like present a thesis on exactly.
It reminds me of some of the things he said about the card counter, where he arrived at the Abu Ghraib of it all as in trying to come up with what would someone feel so guilty about that they could never wash themselves clean, instead of thinking, I'm going to make a movie about a guy who was a prison guard at Abu Ghraib. Like he arrived at it in the process of thinking of some of the stuff that would really eat you up inside.
And it's weird that people didn't really object to that about Card Counter as like, hey, he's not really dealing with this stuff in the American past. That was not in, you know, sort of like mainstream critical response. But here it really
I think it also I think it speaks to, 2021's still relative disinterest in the
agreed
humanity of Arabs and Iraqis specifically, and
the American war project as something that's like as clearly bad as white supremacy.
Yeah. I mean, I have a question for the two of you, and talking about built environments and talking about history, talking about these plantations that you've because Matthew, you were telling me that you used to work like right next to one of these places.
Oh, so I used to work at the New Orleans Museum of Art, which is literally right next to the botanical garden that he takes Maya to in the film when when she finally brings up like, what are those tattoos?
Right.
And another interesting thing, he changes the name of that garden. So this is a really literally every location that's in here, that's not the name of it. So like that was a really fun thing of like while watching this in theaters of being like, holy shit, that's the botanical garden. But the whole Kentfield Garden thing that's on there, that's not what it's called. The same with like the 9th Street gang. Like I'm assuming like there is a 9th Street, but it's, I'm assuming that's kind of like a reference to like the 9th Ward and like, everything that evokes. And even the diner that he meets with the marshal, it's called what is it? Like Tots Diner?
Tots Diner, yeah, Tots.
Because it's Dots. Yeah, it's Dots Diner. Yeah, like I've eaten in that. They have really good pancakes.
Oh,
yeah, I believe it.
So, but yeah, it's as far as like the gardens, I've been to them. They're beautiful and
they look lovely.
Yeah, but it's just really to go back to the idea of like what can someone have done that was so awful that can't be cleaned. And like I feel like that's why I keep returning to Grace as like the biggest part the biggest thing about the film of like as especially like going all the way back to Schrader's very deeply like enmeshed Calvinism of like the literal only thing that can ever save you from all of the horrible shit that you've done and will ever do is like the blood of Christ, right? So like nothing you do can fully atone for it. Like you have to be gifted this grace. And so as far as like the whole idea of the movie not engaging with these things, like in terms of like American racism or the history of slavery, I think it's suggesting that like you can't, no matter how much you try, you can't wash over it, you can't erase it, but you can't solve it either. Which is why I don't think he's even trying to suggest that by Maya and Narvel getting together, that somehow this is like, thanks Obama, racism's gone. I think it's just kind of like, it's like, well, all of this is still fucked, but you can still try to be better.
That was very much the feeling that I got.
Which I think is what Narvel is like. That's like, he doesn't try, like, even though he keeps it covered, he doesn't necessarily hide the fact, like he doesn't not disclose that he was who he was. And even when she asks him in the garden, she says like,
why didn't you get him removed?
Yeah.
And he says like, that's not me anymore. Like, not like I didn't do that or I'm a different person now. Like he just says like that, like that was in the past.
Yeah. Like I was someone else, maybe.
I was someone else. Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, that's, I wanted to ask the two of you about what you think of, because like this is clearly a former plantation that's now a private garden. I think we can all agree that not the ideal outcome for one of these places, but like to what extent should we keep these places around? What do we do with these? Similar to, we talked about this on our card counter episode. What do we do with these people? What do we do with reformed neo-Nazis? What do we do with the built, these reminders of
the same with like the statues from a couple of years ago?
All of that
controversy.
Some of those statues are like, were like 30 years old. I mean, those aren't even
most
historic.
Of them were built like during the Depression.
Or
like right after
But some
World
of these,
War I.
like, I mean, I'm sympathetic to the idea that there is a way of that destroying these things just denies that they ever happened. So that's maybe not the best way to. We certainly shouldn't destroy all of them, I think, but to what extent should they be turned into music? Certainly, you shouldn't be able to get married in them, like Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively, who got married at a plantation. Look it up. But I mean, I guess that is something Deadpool would do because he's such a
stinker,
such a rascal.
Yeah.
But
the plantations.
Yeah. Oh, I just wanted to say also there's a documentary that did play TIFF, in fact, that not the same year, but documentary called Skin. That is about, it played in 2018. Oh, sorry, no, this is a movie about that guy called Skin, starring Jamie Bell, but there's also a documentary about this skinhead who had, his face was covered in like neo-Nazi tattoos, and the documentary is about him getting them lasered off. And I watched the trailer for it, and it seems like a fair amount of this is about this like Christ-like suffering of this guy getting his face lasered, and he's literally like shaking and crying because he's got a big tattoo like across his eye, and they're lasering it off. So there's like a way that I think some of what that film is trying to do is like basically punishing this guy, showing the punishment of this man for his past actions and beliefs. But like, yeah, I don't know. What do we do with these places? What do we do with these things? Clearly, they're serving a purpose to an extent, like being used in 12 Years a Slave or something to remind people what this looked like. But yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think about plantation?
Yeah, I think preservation and public education is the best route. I've been on one of these tours to one of I think it was the Myrtle Plantation, and they bring you through like what used to be like slave houses. Like they still have some of them still standing, and they spend less on let's look at what the family did on the inside, and some of them are better, from what I understand, some of them are better about this than others, of like where the focus is, of like, this is how this family exploited labor and kept these people enslaved, and all of this happened, as opposed to here was this like perfect little ecosystem where it just so happened that like a couple of people happened to not have any freedom. You know, like it's like like how it's presented and how honest it is is crucial. And I think also the accessibility of these spaces, of bringing children, you know, on school tours, of like, when you learn about American history, like this is where, you know, a lot of it happened. This is where like a lot of terrible things happen. And that's kind of I realize that this is not the general consensus, but I'm very much of the opinion that like, I think all of history, and like not just good or bad, like I don't try to apply those terms, but I think like all of it should kind of be shoved in your face. Like, I think you should not be allowed to forget that like anything happened. And so, but I think like how you present it is crucial. So like taking these statues down and not like blowing them up in some act of like, suddenly we're free from racism, but like putting them in museums where people can learn, this is what this guy did, you know, and the same with these plantations. Cause I mean, both the plantations that they used in this movie, these were not like run of the mill, just had a couple. Cause like, I mean, on average, like most plantations like had maybe like 10 slaves. Rosedown and Greenwood had over 400 each. Like, this is like, we're talking, these aren't even the 1% of plantations. These are the 0.01% of plantations. Like, these were big fucking deals. And so to have these as the site of these beautiful gardens, like, and you know, obviously, like, it's not mentioned in the movie, but I think because they are plantations, and I think because anyone concerned or with any knowledge of American history can look at these icons and say, I think that's that. Like, I'm pretty sure that is what this is. And then you dig in and you realize, holy shit, these were massive, you know? And in the same way that, like, and I think Schrader does that throughout the film with every character. Like, he gives you these, like, little bits and pieces of who they are, and then he makes you dig in deeper. like, we don't know why Narvel necessarily joined this white supremacist gang.
Mm-hmm.
Like, all he says, he was grown up to hate.
Yeah.
You know, he was taught to hate. You know, we don't know necessarily what made him flip, other than, like, we can assume that it's because he refused to kill that one man's wife and child.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But we don't know exactly.
Right.
Like,
and also,
you know,
like, it could be that he saw their humanity and changed his whole belief system. It could be that he had a moment where he couldn't do it and then realized, oh, I'm fucked. The only way I can survive that moment of hesitation is by flipping. You know, we don't know any of that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, while we can't have an exact answer, we have, like, these little crumbs. You know, like, we don't know exactly what happened to Maya. You know, obviously we know that she is a drug user, but we don't know how bad her life got or exactly how bad the relationship was with her mother. Like, so much is left unsaid that I think it's that addressing by being indirect. And I think that's really what makes this entire trilogy so beautiful, is that Schrader is giving us so much by giving us, like, these little
slivers,
glimpses.
Slivers,
thank you. Glimpses, you know. And so then we pull, because then we're thinking about these characters of, like, I wonder what they did. I wonder what they're really thinking. Like, we're engaged in a way that isn't just, I know everything about who you are, so I don't have to give a shit anymore.
Mm-hmm. Which is, I think, part of the transcendental style and film ethos, right? To sort of say, like, you do present, you don't hide, but you also don't explain, you don't clarify necessarily.
Yeah.
And, Matthew, you said a few things in there that I think are extremely wonderful and correct. And now maybe I'm in danger of being facile also, but I think part of my frustration in reading about this film was that a lot of the people objecting to it, maybe I'm being unfair, I would say fall into a kind of a white liberal category.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I do think that, to me, there's maybe been kind of an evolution from the sort of like multicultural color blindness of my childhood, at least in a semi-progressive place, where it was very much what you were talking about, like, shake hands, racism is gone, we just need to treat everybody the same. There's been
one of each type of person in the textbook illustrations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's
all the problems are gone.
Right.
Burger King Kids Club style, yeah.
Yep.
The Burger King Kids.
Truly.
There's even there's a guy if you can get the Latino guy in a wheelchair, then you kind of, that's like 2 for 1.
Yeah.
Wheels was crucial to that gang.
That's right.
Yeah.
But now I think maybe there's and it's a good evolution, but still extremely flawed version, which is white liberals wanting to just condemn every version of racism and say, like, okay, the way to solve this is just to say that every racist person is very, very bad and we hate them, which is fair. But I also think,
like, do we turn them into dog food? Like, what are you going to do with them?
And also, you know, I feel like it's dishonest, like you're saying, Matthew, to the fact that, are you just not recognizing that like lots of the people that you think are fine are also racist? They're just subtly racist, and that these institutions exist. Yeah. So it's this weird double talk of, like, we really, really hate these Karens who are going after black people in public, which, again, very fair to be frustrated about that, but not recognizing, like, hey, you're a part of, like, an HOA in your neighborhood that absolutely doesn't
let black people live in the neighborhood.
Exactly. Or is, like, questioning every black postman that comes into the neighborhood or something. And
exactly.
Right.
Like, I feel you live here?
Exactly. And I feel like this movie, while absolutely I think there's still things to object to in terms of, like, how thoughtful it always is, or, like, is Maya enough of a fleshed out character? Sort of another common thread people objected to. But that, to me, is much more interesting as a conversation than just saying, like, well, you can't just have this neo-Nazi that gets potentially forgiven in a film. Because I think that just tells me that you don't realize that I think people of color are having to forgive formerly racist people all the time just like walk around.
Yeah.
You know, I'm in a relationship with a non-white person, and I think it's a recognition of, like, your daily life isn't a question of, like, let me find the good white people. It's like, let me find the people that are not racist enough that, like, it's easy to be around them, or, like, I can still have a good time, or I can focus on other things. And I think, I don't know, I appreciate, at least when I was watching the film, Maya seemed like a character who was real enough, and that she was trying to figure out, like, my life is very difficult. Here's this person who has shown me care and patience and humanized me in all of our interactions. And that makes me feel like maybe I value them. And then it's thrown into turmoil by this discovery that their past was based on violent hatred of my identities and like, a continuation of violent oppression. And then what do I do with that? How do I live that out? Do I just leave a very real recognition of like you're saying, a non-transcendental recognition of like, it's not like I have these other options or like there's just gonna be this washing away or this total restart, but rather this question of like, is it possible to make these things work? Not to reconcile or to forget or to require forgiveness, to get to your question, Jake. I don't know. To me, it's not about, do you have to totally forgive an ex-neo-Nazi? And we could talk about some of these people I think you and I both read about. But the question becomes like, well, what do you ask of these people? And the only other thing I would say is that I think it connects back to one of our discussions about the centrist or American desire to categorize people as either innocent or guilty, like totally clean or totally fouled and worthy of being in prison and being discarded and being treated as trash. And I think to me, it's the returning to that transformative justice model of like, all right, if you recognize that these things are part of a pattern, what can you do to reduce this behavior, to reduce these patterns, these negative patterns, these harmful, very violent patterns? And also, what can you do with these people that puts them on a path to being better? That's not requiring forgiveness from the victim. Nobody's saying that they have to do that, but just saying like, well, what do we do with these people? Making them a master gardener seems like, I don't know. That I like that as an idea. We joked about that basically in our card counter episode. Yeah,
basically saying that we were joking that the folks from Abu Ghraib should maybe be put in like a field to till some vegetables where they're not too close to anybody to
right.
Well, I mean, that would be such a crucial path towards prison reform, is understanding that everyone fucks up, and some people's fuck ups are a lot worse than others, when it comes to like, taking someone's life. Sure. Yep. But that doesn't mean that a person is in perpetuity condemned. Yeah. And just like awful, the idea that you can be better. And I think it's really important that like Schrader doesn't have Maya like immediately say, oh, okay, well, I guess you were nice to me, so everything's okay now. Like she spends the second half of the movie
she gets to freak out,
coming to terms, like literally in tears, and not speaking to him for periods of time because she can't process the fact that this man who looked after her for weeks and was kind to her and that she developed this emotional connection to suddenly has this about him. And so it's like, how do you put the two together of how can you coincide that someone has done multiple things that are so awful and yet is a nice person to you, right? And like, I don't know, like I think about that all the time because like one of my jobs is like dog walking and pet sitting. And so, a lot of the clients are like more affluent. Yeah. And I wonder a lot of times of like, how many of the people that I work, that I walk their dogs and take care of their animals, how many of them are Trump supporters? I don't know. I would imagine percentage wise, probably some of them. And then I think about like, if they're nice to me, what do I do with that? Right. Like, because that's more difficult because then I can't just write them off and say, oh, these are the most despicable people on the face of the planet because they were nice to me. So it's like, what do I,
I mean, there's,
What do you to accept someone else's humanity, even when it doesn't agree with yours? Do you just like, am I terrible for just writing someone off? Like, I
mean, I think that's what makes the gardening metaphor potent, because he's talking like in the narration. Narvel talks about different sort of theories or tendencies in gardening toward various levels of like allowing things to be natural, which is obviously a vexed term in itself, but like this guy's job is taking the unruly and the potentially like the ungovernable and trying to govern it, or trying to cultivate things in a direction toward beauty by like carefully controlling and constraining them, which I think is like the question that we're all getting at, is like, how do we take people who are, how can we as a society, I don't think the three of us are, first of all, they're not letting me do any of this stuff.
Yeah.
But like, what could a more ideal society do to like help guide people toward the most beautiful version of themselves spiritually or whatever, and avoid the nasty tendencies that I think many
pitfalls of ignorance,
if not all of us, contain. Yeah. And like, if those people are capable of being nice to a guy who walks their dog, can we cultivate that niceness?
Yeah.
And explain like, well, so you know how when you're nice to this guy, it makes you feel good about yourself. What if you were nicer to a bunch more people, and what if I told you, Morpheus style, that like you supporting this guy for attorney general is inconsistent with being nice to a large group of people? Like that, there's a way we could try to become master gardeners societally. But then I was also reading a fascinating article about the requirement in many horticulture programs around the turn of the century, that you had to take courses in eugenics.
Yeah.
So this
there's like a biological superiority. Yeah. No, I mean, I think anybody who's studied plant genetics, I think there's a reason that there was a lot of crossover in like the late 19th century with people who were thinking like, well, we can really optimize traits here, and maybe some
exactly
groups.
They were trying to do trying to do with human beings what they did with corn.
And I do think that's part of why the race mixing or miscegenation thing is such a sticking point for white supremacists, because even those who sort of maintain the separate but equal narrative of like, we don't even resent Black people, we just think that they have different values or different culture or whatever, and they can't all live together. Intermarriage is like the ultimate threat to those things, right? It's the sort of this sense of like, you can collapse those, and maybe there's not really that meaningful of a difference if you can mix, and if we've all been mixed to some degree. But
which is and it's stupid also if you know anything about like genetic,
so stupid.
Like a broader pool of genes is better in every way. I don't know. Whatever.
To return to your metaphor, Jake, that I think is in the film, this like 800 to 1,000 year seed that maybe takes time to actually, or requires time, or we can't anticipate when it's going to be able to blossom. And to clarify, I don't want to speak for you guys, but I'm certainly not objecting to Battle of Algiers style violent resistance to shitty situations where you're being oppressed actively. And I don't think the film is, at least for me, arguing for like passivity in the face of oppression. I think it's looking at like situations where maybe that oppression is no longer an immediate threat from a person or from a group, and then like, what does that process look like rebuilding from there? So to me, they're different scenarios. I don't know.
Oh, absolutely. Like I don't think the film is by any means saying that violence is sometimes the preferred choice. I mean, Narvel breaks RG and Sissy's both of their kneecaps, all four kneecaps, with that gun butt. And I think that's, but to me, it's funny. I think that's a sign of how hopeful the movie is, because past life Narvel would have shot both of them, no question. Like, just like, these scumbags don't deserve to live. 2 bullets, they're done. But because Maya extended that grace to them by not shooting them, and then that's not who he is anymore, but he still wants to send the message. And so, like, but he gives the 2 of them another chance. Because, now he's no longer just this, like, crazy guy who shows up with pruning shears and is like, I'm going to snip your balls off. That now he has now declared himself a man of action. And it's like, okay, this guy broke our kneecaps. We probably shouldn't test him again.
Yeah.
I mean, I think in terms of long-term effect, knock-on effect, I think it might have been more humane to cut their balls off, because like, if both your kneecaps are destroyed, you're gonna they're
not walking for months.
And then once you get your ball sack sewed up, I think you could, I
don't know if a master gardener snips them. I don't think
you don't even need them sutured, is what you're saying, because he's such an expert pruner. That's interesting. By the way,
professional.
He is a professional. Ian, you mentioned the 1,000-year seed. That must be why they call him Joel Edgerton. Is that?
It's a good one.
So wait, why do they call him Joel?
I don't know. Look, yeah, I mean, but you make a good point. That's what I'm saying. I don't know where we should head next in terms of discussion.
I kind of, I also wanted to go into, I guess, like looking at how Narvel's journey compares to Pastor Toller and also to William Tell, because I think rage is involved with all three of them, but what each of them does with that rage kind of, like, I think that's part of what defines each of them as a character. So, like, you know, for Toller, like, I think I guess whether you want to look at it as his despair turns into rage or his rage turns into despair, but that's kind of like the confine of his, like, spiritual self. Whereas, like, for Tell, it's very much like rage if it were a prison, which is why I think the Abu Ghraib aspect of his life is so perfect, because here is this man who is so tightly wound and who, like, puts sheets over everything and, like, has such a restricted way of living that to punish himself for the rage that he has displayed, he is like, he's like imprisoning himself. But I think for Narvel, he is trying to turn that rage into peace. And I think with the gardening metaphor of, like, gardening requires understanding and gentleness and patience. And, like, these are which you could easily say those are the three things that we should apply to people who are trying to reform themselves. Like, regardless of what they've done, that if someone is trying to make themselves better, if we can give them those things, then that's the example we can set to people who would dismiss them and dismiss their humanity.
Yeah.
But, like, from his like opening narration, he says gardening is a belief in the future, a belief that things will happen according to plan. And I love that so much, because that automatically sets this up as the most hopeful, I think, of the trilogies. That like, you know, like, you don't garden you don't plant something if you think tomorrow's not going to happen, like, or if you don't think you deserve tomorrow, or you don't deserve something to come from your labor. Like, you hope that it'll work out. And while the card counter obviously is dealing with, like, the luck that comes with everything, with its gambling metaphors, and First Reformed has faith, that, like, both of those things are things that rely on more than just you. Like, you're you're really hoping that, like, you get the right card, or you're hoping that God is out there listening. But gardening, you can hope for ideal conditions, but a lot of it is, like, your expertise, your ability, like, you have your life more in your hands. Like, there's more agency.
I should say I've never been much for gardening.
I
haven't had a lot of success with it, is what I'm saying. Okay. In terms of this patience and hope thing. Yeah. Hasn't gone that great for me. But I love this sort of line of comparison, because I do think the film is a lot more hopeful, and I wonder also if that isn't part of why some people were so pissed off by this movie, because
I absolutely,
I think so too.
In America especially, we want vengeance, and that vengeance seems quite righteous in a lot of. I mean, you mentioned Matthew, you mentioned Django Unchained. Like, I don't think anybody comes out of that movie thinking that he shouldn't have burned down the plantation. You know, like, that's a satisfying conclusion, but realistically, violence, I think, tends to beget violence from what I've seen. And Ian, I agree with you about, in dire crisis moments, revolutionary violence is totally understandable. But, like, Schrader himself, there's a quotation, something he said at the Venice Film Festival when this film was playing there, has kind of made the rounds. I believe inspired by a lyric from a song by Dev Hynes, the Blood Orange guy who did the score for this film. But Schrader said, "When I was younger, I used to believe that I never want to leave this world without saying 'fuck you.' And now I never want to leave this world without saying I love you. And
that's big.
Yeah.
That's a big change.
Yeah. Our friend of the show, Elena Lazic, who she wrote about this in Anima's magazine. I should say her sister was on the show, but I've DM'd with Elena. I would love for her to be a friend of the show.
Oh, yeah.
Putting it out there. She was writing about this in Animus magazine and said that the film does end with I love you, but also with fuck you. And I think that's because Schrader can't help but be a little stinker. So there's like, I think he's partly like using this gentleness as a kind of barb, as a provocation, which is such an interesting Schrader type move to do. I don't know. Yeah,
there's one more piece of textual evidence that maybe you guys saw this quote that Schrader talked about his choice of epigraphs for different films, and the taxi driver epigraph that you and I talked about a long time ago, Jake, from Thomas Wolfe, about solitary men and loneliness being the central and inevitable fact of human existence. And then for this script, he put at the beginning, not on screen, but just in the screenplay itself, a quote from Leonard Cohen, which says, "And I choose the rooms that I live in with care. The windows are small and the walls are almost bare. There's only one bed and there's only one prayer. I listen all night for you to step on the stair. Twixt the two is the arc of hope that living can bring." So there's, again, he just seems to be calling again and again for hope. Is he being a little bit of a shithead in the way he does it? Definitely possible. And to return to what you were saying, Matthew, I do think that there's also, I don't know if it's intentional on his part, again, maybe it doesn't matter. The problems that the three protagonists are facing, I think, obviously we've talked about how Schrader is maybe interpreting them through the individuals, but climate change, obviously extremely urgent and dire and so global that I think it is something that very naturally produces despair in people. And we can talk about, and we did talk about whether that's productive despair, like motivating, or whether that's enervating and sort of hopeless and maybe defeatist. And then Abu Ghraib is obviously sort of like something that is more affected by individual action, but is still part of this giant imperial project that is, like a hundreds of years of history and ongoing question about the nature of capitalism, the nature of America, and how it operates with other people. And then this film, obviously racism, also a millennia old issue, and in the United States, certainly centuries old. But I guess to me, it's sort of like narrowed the focus on not trying to confront the problem, right? I think in the other two films, the characters are characters who are saying like, I wish I could do something about this, or I wish, in the case of William Tell, I wish I could have not done this, not participated in this. And there's a bit of that here as well. Obviously, I wish I hadn't done those things, but it's more a question of like, I did these things. How can I change my behavior? And he doesn't seem to really engage with the question. And maybe this is also part of what upset people of, well, how do I look at my environment and sort of address like racist institutions or something? To me, that's just not seemingly a question in Narvel's mind. I do think he's a genuine reformed individual who has seen the error of his ways, but he is just trying to address like, how can I make some small amends or take myself out of the pool of people engaged in this? Right. And that's sort of the extent. And I think in that way, it maybe allows for more hope, because it's not a question of like, can I change this? Can I shift the global momentum or something?
Can I toss a backpack full of grenades into the core of the racism machine?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think for Narvel, his inaction in those circles is action. Like, by choosing to not engage with these Proud Boys, he is at least helping the entire situation by not adding one more gun to the mix.
Yeah.
And I think, especially since this is fairly still somewhat recent in terms of his life, like it's been only within the decade that he's been removed from this circle. I think the journey of spending the first, like, let's say 30 something years of his life as this hateful man, and then spending less than a decade as someone who chooses to literally cultivate life as opposed to destroy it. Like, I think before he becomes like, a canvasser for the ACLU, like, I think he has to fix himself.
Wow. This is a really great point. And I got some support for it in a second. Yeah. Please keep going. But I got a real life example of somebody saying the exact same thing.
So, and so I think like his, like, even just the nature of him challenging this woman who represents literally the plantation aristocracy of the Old South in the 21st century, and saying to her, fuck you, I'm going to live with this biracial woman whom I love. Like, that is, it's like you can see the steps that he's taking to then being like, okay, I'm starting with myself, and now I'm adding another person to the mix. So now that circle is growing. And so who knows, maybe, within a decade, maybe he's someone who decides to, he might not be this like touring like spokesperson for anti-racism because of the nature of his witness protection program, but maybe there is something else that he can do. But at the same time, maybe that's the best that he can do. And I think like that, is a challenge of like, we want everyone to be these like exemplars of like activism, but maybe the best thing that someone can do is just not hurt and try to love someone else. And maybe that's enough. I don't know.
I mean, I'm reminded, I would love to hear your piece of evidence. I suspect I know the guy you're talking about, but I'm reminded of, I heard Miriam Kaba, the abolitionist activist, talking about how she sometimes gets flack for this, but she does think that like tiny acts are important because they add up, and like tiny acts of
if everyone did that.
And I think, we need some people to be louder than others, but some people can quietly be different. And we'll talk about, I do want to raise the specter of Zendaya, but after we talk.
Okay, all right, we'll leave her floating there. Yeah, first of all, just to talk about Kaba a little bit, I will say that she's certainly inspiration for me in terms of, obviously, as a Black woman and somebody who's experienced much more of the harm in question here. I think more powerful when she talks about how, despite her very vocal opposition to the carceral state and to the police, she's not somebody who necessarily is like champing at the bit for long prison sentences for cops who are prosecuted for misconduct or violent abuse or whatever, because I think she, just is incredibly enlightened in her sense of like, well, at a certain point, you are just perpetuating the same sense of like, when people do things we object to, we punish them and we dehumanize them in a sort of permanent way. Anyway, the quote I wanted to use. So Jake, you put me onto this guy. I was aware of one of the people that you shared, Christian Picciolini. He's sort of, in my recollection, the like big face in the last, I don't know, since basically Proud Boy time, whatever, starting in like 2015 or something, that it became a national conversation, as like an ex-white supremacist who is now very, very active in trying to deprogram people and trying to bring people around. And I will say, maybe I'm too gullible, but I'm won over by the way that he talks about like, look, I'm aware of the damage I've done. I think some of his music was like Dylan Roof. Yeah,
Dylan Roof was a fan of the white supremacist music that this guy had written.
Like
so like there's a way that
he was quoting and stuff. Yeah.
Even if he gets the tattoos removed, like this music is still being passed around.
So yeah, he seems to really know, like, I don't even know if I can do more good than I've done harm, like in the rest of my life, because of sort of the, like you're saying, the knock-on effects of creating more and more white supremacists. But his attitude, he addresses a lot of the classic stuff of like, a lot of these people get involved because they lack identity, they lack community, they lack a sense of self-respect. And, it's about not just teaching them to sort of like love other races, but to actually see them as humans who are maybe making this mistake, not so much because of like a coherent ideology, but more just because of psychological problems. But Jake, you put me onto this guy, Scoop, who I wasn't aware of, but was talked about in multiple articles. So he was the leader of the National Socialist movement, like the face of, one of the faces of white supremacist movements in the United States.
Like this is the thing that the American Nazi Party like literally evolved into.
Exactly.
They changed the name.
Yeah.
But he was like the head of it.
Yes, for years and years. He even showed up in another article that you sent me where he was like calling out one of the guys in the article because he had gone on to marry a Black woman. So this was sort of eerie. But now he has come out and denounced this. But a couple things that make people skeptical. One, he's involved with the trial around the death of, her name's Heather Heyer. Is that the woman who
Heather
died
Heyer from
Charlottesville? Yeah, who was killed by a white supremacist at Charlottesville. So he's kind of like under the microscope for culpability for organizing that rally and maybe being legally responsible for her death. And Christian Picciolini, the other reformed guy, he really is skeptical of how quickly this dude, literally in the space of like months, went from head of the National Socialist movement to being a speaker and like engaging with people and supposedly trying to convert. And he was quoted in the article that you sent me, Jake, Picciolini, as saying like, look, I was initially excited that this guy maybe is abandoning white supremacy, but he hasn't done the work on himself, which is exactly what you were saying, Matthew. He's like, I'm really suspect of somebody who's like not willing to recognize the harm that they've done and to work on their own issues first before they start to do this sort of, like you're saying, like ACLU style public activism. So those two things make him suspicious of this guy. And I think that is where it's fair to say maybe we shouldn't be forgiving white supremacists who just one day like wipe their hands and say, whoops, sorry, can we just forgive me forever?
I would love to see all these guys speaking fees.
Yeah,
I would love
that's
to
a
know
big part of the issue.
What all these guys are getting paid. Yeah. I noticed, Matthew, your reaction when Ian mentioned that somebody in one of these articles had married a black woman. I did see a number of anecdotes of former white supremacists, white nationalists in relationships with black partners and talking about how part of their realization, part of the way that they kind of came out of this programming was not unlike the Yaphet Kotto monologue in Blue Collar, but realizing that the socioeconomic circumstances that led them to be attracted to like a violent white nationalist gang were very similar to the circumstances of some of the black people that they had hated outright. And so like there was a story of a woman who had been in a skinhead gang who went to prison, and part of the reason she was a skinhead was because she was gay and hiding it, and then she met another formerly closeted lesbian woman in prison who was black, and they had like their first relationship with a woman was with one another in prison, which is like that's crazy, but also
it sounds so improbable. Right. Like it sounds like And I think that is such a powerful, I don't know, like an example to use as like a teaching tool of like, if you can end up loving someone who's not just so different from you, but someone that like you'd spent years of your life hating, then what does that say about the potential for the human spirit, for the human heart?
Right.
And one of the things that was mentioned about the guy saying like, I don't know if I can ever undo, I can't undo the harm that I contributed, and I don't know if I can ever do as much good to like outweigh that. But I think what matters is the trying part. Like that's the key. Like that's like the huge thing. It's like, like for the people whose lives you've affected in whatever way, you can't remove that. You can't take that back. You can't, like, whether they forgive you or not, it's still going to stay there. But what matters is, like, did you try to be better? You know? Yeah. And that's the huge thing.
I mean, this is where I get hung up, too, is, like, there's the stories of Picciolini and, like, this woman in the prison where you find out from their background, like, Picciolini got basically groomed to be a white supremacist when he was 14.
Oh shit.
And so like, you know, this is we talk about this all the time, like the point at which this is like the Stockholm syndrome question, right? Like to what extent does anyone not have Stockholm syndrome? And so the guy who groomed Picciolini was like 28 or something. And so like I'm mad at that guy, but also if we trace that guy's psychopathology back, probably something bad happened to him. Right. This Scoop guy, obviously, like, if Father Toller would find goodness in this man as a child of God, but like, I don't think he should be collecting speaking fees. But also, I don't think maybe anybody should be collecting speaking fees.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, this is I like that this film presents as a way to sort of absolve yourself, this much more quiet devotion to like beauty and nature. I would go for a public garden, but other than that, I think pretty good option as far as absolution goes.
And there is, of course, just to voice some people who aren't present, I think there's the kind of like Gazans objecting to sympathetic articles about IDF soldiers or black activists saying like, all right, well, how many articles do we need like celebrating this cop who will learn to maybe be less also racist? Important. Yeah. And look, I'm also not going to say like, I'm never going to ask somebody who's still experiencing and probably for the rest of their life will be experiencing suffering because of the organizations and the institutions and the sort of momentum that these people were a part of. You don't have to make it a big part of your day to be going and like high-fiving somebody who's on their own psychological journey. That's to me like totally fine. Don't blame you. But if we're trying to, like you're saying, Matthew, sort of present like, well, what are the options? Then I think there's a certain amount of, like you said, patience and love that we can offer to these people. And we don't all have to be the ones offering this all the time. But I think obviously, just practically speaking, that seems like the best bet for us.
I do have a question I'd like to raise to the panel. So Schrader tried very hard to get Zendaya to play the Maya character. And I believe it was simply an issue of fee.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, this movie was made for like
$1.4 million, I think. Or no, sorry, the film cost $4.1 million. I think it made $1.4 million.
Yeah. But I mean, I think that would just fundamentally change the tenor of the response to this film in a way that you can't have TikTok fan cams of Master Gardener. I'm sure there probably are. Like, there's got to be a Q Hive. Well, maybe they don't call themselves that, but there's got to be a Quintessa Swindle fan group and a Joel Edgerton. People who are hot for Joel Edgerton, even with the tattoos, and maybe because of them. But yeah, I mean, do you guys think that this movie with Zendaya is like, does it work? I don't know.
No, I don't. Personally, I don't think so.
I think also not.
I think she's kind of a distraction, I think. Yeah. And I'm honestly not the biggest fan of her.
No, she's medium to me.
Yeah, like
well, that's Patricia Arquette, but she's pretty good too.
She has like she has a range, and I don't think that this film falls into that range.
Yeah, that's
so fair. Like I think she works in Challengers. I don't think she works in something like Master Gardener. Because I also think that because of her very, shall we say, subtle emoting, that it helps when she's in a film like Dune, where there is so much happening, where you can appreciate her being somewhat not present. But in a movie that is the closest thing to like the monastic lifestyle, as Master Gardener is, I don't think that she would work. Like Quintessa was wonderful.
They're quite good.
Like her and Joel work together so well. And her and Sigourney Weaver work together so well. Like even though they have fewer scenes together, but just like that first lunch where you can feel the tension, you can see the awkwardness of like and Norma's talking to her as if like she somehow never met her before. And,
that's very weird.
Yeah. And Maya's like, yeah, I remember you as a kid and my mom talked about you all the time. Like I didn't just appear out of nowhere.
Right.
And so like, but like she pulls that off. And I think it also helps. Like I had never seen her in anything prior to this. And so having that fresh face made it even more, not just believable for me, but like I embraced her. My
only experience with them was in Black Adam.
See, I didn't watch Black Adam.
As Cyclone, the ninth most important superhero.
Yeah, look, I totally agree with both of you. That was another point of confusion for me. Some of the people were objecting to maybe the instrumentalization of their character as like a tool, or particularly as a young black woman, an object of romantic desire in the character in the film, and somebody who maybe like saves this white guy, which I don't think is really the narrative exactly. So I also sort of object to that.
I think they save each other.
Yeah, but I think I agree that, I don't know, I thought Quintessa did a wonderful job. I think there's several moments in the film where their acting is like the scene that you referenced, Matthew, in the cafeteria of the botanical garden, where they're like skipping basically like a CD. They're like so like sort of frustrated and can't process.
So angry.
And, I thought that was just very nicely done. And Zendaya, I love in Challengers, so I think maybe I'm more of a fan of her than you guys. But I totally agree that I don't think range is the only thing that defines whether an actor is good or bad. I think it's about their utility in different circumstances and understanding what they're capable of. I think the three leads in this film across the board, incredible. I'm sometimes picky about Schrader dialogue. Here, it's still sort of like heightened and theatrical, but it works really, really well for me as a combination of sort of like capturing the passive aggressive mannered nature of somebody like Norma, and also just creating this sort of like grand quality within a very, very small film in any other capacity, right? So it sort of injects this height. So I don't know. I think they did a wonderful job. Wouldn't have liked Zendaya. Can we talk about the sex scene, which people also objected to?
Yeah, I think we need to talk about the sex scene. Well, so I have in my notes here that...
How detailed are the notes?
Well...
For this scene specifically.
Well, now Jake wanted to tell me about how they don't make films. People have lost the ability to... Sorry.
Not a Dong film. No, I my note is specifically on the kind of... Well, let me describe the sex scene. Yeah. And then we can talk about it. Because my note is specifically on the kind of symbolic expression section and not the sex section. Mm-hmm. So I think Schrader tends to... We have praised him in the past for eroticizing the male body in a way that male directors generally don't. Ostensibly straight male directors specifically, obviously in American Gigolo. Here, I think he's in a bit of a pickle because to eroticize Edgerton's body would also be to eroticize these Nazi tattoos. And Schrader knows that's at least, that button is perhaps even too hot. And... So there's that weird scene where Narvel takes his shirt off while journaling, while Maya is sleeping in the next room, and it's unclear, I think, at least to me as a viewer, it was unclear what he was trying to do until we learned. Like,
I think it's subtle, but I had a sense from the moment he's doing it. He keeps glancing over at Maya. Yeah. It seems like he wants her to see.
She comes on to him, like the reason that they get kicked out of the gardens is that she comes on to him and he is clearly like not totally upset by the advance, but he pushes her off, and then Norma sees him leaving Maya's little residence and like buckling his belt back up. Yeah. So like she thinks that they've slept together. So there's an attraction. So after they've been traveling while Maya's pissed off at him for being a Nazi, she comes into his room and says, like, I really want to take my clothes off. And he says, I would like that as well. And so there's a kind of light sleeper-esque mutual shedding of clothing. Actually, this is sort of a Dong film. It's more of a back balls film. We get the fabled back balls. And
but to get a big hock of thigh to buttock.
Yeah, he's this man. The man is no stranger to the weight room. Yes, it would seem.
Oh yeah.
And then they're wearing the Quintessa is wearing like some kind of pasties or something, and looks a bit like an alien in a way that I would say maybe just throw some more shadows on everybody. Yeah, because this makes the scene weird. But they're sort of regarding each other. There's a weird like the beginnings of a kind of dominance play thing where she has him crawl toward her or something, but like this is like so many things in the film, this is not dwelled upon, this is not lingered on. And then we cut to the two of them driving in a car, and I believe Maya begins by leaning out the window and like hooting as the trees around them sort of erupt in color and flowers in a way that is, you know, $4 million worth of, well, $4 million total budget
right.
worth apportionment for CGI. Yeah. But, you know, I think it works. I think he's leaning into the kind of unreality of it, the way he does in that Magical Mystery Tour sequence in First Reformed and the LED like light show garden in Card Counter. But I wrote in my notes.
Yeah.
I wrote him. Yeah, that part's great. But in my notes here I have that Schrader thinks sex between a biracial woman and a reformed white supremacist is like nature reclaiming the world in a beautiful, abundant explosion of color or the end of Roger Rabbit.
So I definitely think that's what people were mad at, because I think that they, to me, are reading it as like, you can have this experience, and as long as one person, the reformed white supremacist, is like showing enough contrition and kneeling, and he sort of, the weird part of it, like you're saying, Jake, is he initiates it seemingly himself. Like he starts the kneel without Maya saying anything, and then she says like, no, like take the rest of your clothes off, reveal your tattoos, and then she says some variation of like, keep doing what you do. All right, now go back to kneeling. So she sort of takes this maybe dom control, and I think people felt like, okay, Schrader thinks that like you play out this scene of like a transition of power or reclaiming of power, and then the world is great again. I don't know. I will say it wasn't my very favorite scene, but I think it worked better for me than it seemingly worked for most people, which is that I just saw it as more of the messiness that Matthew was talking about. In fact, I think it's where I wrote down some variation of that note, which was like, here we have two people who are trying to figure out like, how do I bear enough of myself and make you be vulnerable enough where I'm confident that like you're really showing me this desire for absolution or this regret or this like treatment of me as a person. How can I feel safe? I do think it's complicated knowing that Quintessa identifies, I think, as trans non-binary, and obviously has a real complicated relationship with their own body. And so the idea of like revealing that body for another person, I think carries a lot of weight about like, can you sort of accept this thing that is both me and not me? And in Joel Edgerton's character's case, also a similar situation of like, can you accept me, but also this thing that I carry with me that maybe I don't want to be a part of my life, but is a part of my history. And I don't know. To me, it felt like a messy scene that was trying for some big things and maybe tended towards an accidental reading or like a fair but accidental reading about this being the sort of like beautiful conclusion or harmonization of these elements. But I don't know. I guess I would sort of give it like a tepid thumbs up or something, because I sort of like I liked the things that it was going for, and it didn't seem like it was maybe as easy as people were making it out to be. Matthew, what do you think about this?
I really I'm kind of ashamed that I didn't think that far into it. I think because I loved the, not just the affirmation that Narvel is sexually a lot more comfortable in the subservient position. Like earlier, Norma says, "Now take me to bed, sweet pea." And so like then he like follows her up, and like anytime someone, you know, she would tell him like, no, I want to see, like, take your shirt off, like all of that. Like he only does until he's told, which plays into the whole Nazi thing a little bit, which is really interesting. But I think it also, there's that aspect of, for someone who does care about order so much as a horticulturalist, that here is a space in his life where he does like to relinquish that expertise and that control.
And then you also get the explosion of like ungoverned plant life, which is
un-Nazi-like.
And I guess like I really liked, I don't know, it's like as a way for Schrader to try to like depict orgasm in a new way. I just like, I thought it was fun and playful in that regard, especially for a romance scene that starts off so mysterious and also like kind of like a little sinister in a way, because it is mostly in shadow and because it is very much, I don't know, maybe sinister is not the right word, but like there is something like, I guess because of the mystery of what's about to happen, because this is the first time that Maya has reached out to him after not speaking, so you're not sure what she is going to want from him.
Yeah.
And so that whole dynamic being established right in front of you, and then him just kneeling without her having to say. So like it goes from like very serious and very like ritualistic to then like this little fantasy of driving together on the same road and all of a sudden just appreciating all of this life and color that's blossomed around them. And so like, yeah, like I just took it as like, you know, this is a fun way of like showing fucking without showing fucking. And, but I really
he likes that.
Yeah. And so like, which is funny for someone who like doesn't appreciate when it's not a dong film. Right. Like you would think. Yeah. But I can see how it doesn't work, because it's also the only fantastical scene in the entire film. Like it's the closest that we get to the end of First Reformed with, sorry, my cats are.
We should say for the listener, there's among the 3 people on the call, we have 10 cats.
10 cats.
Oh wow,
This is a 10 cat
strong.
Podcast. Yeah.
Almost our height, almost our cat height, I think.
What's the record?
Did Mariah Gates have more cats?
No, I thought Jake had how many?
Oh yeah, Jake.
He had like
Trapila.
7 cats or something.
He's got 100,000 dogs and cats at his house. Yeah. Anyway,
but you're talking about this moment of the fantastical. Yeah.
That of just of like the 2 of them like hovering above each other. Like I saw it as just another attempt at, while it might not seem like a transcendental film, Ian, like you said, there are still moments of transcendence in it, and I think that was one of them. Of like, here's this extremely spiritual moment between these 2 people, and I found it to be beautiful, and especially after everything that has happened prior, and then like the violence and the tension that happens after. It's really, I always appreciate those moments in films that are like harder to watch or like brutal in certain regards, where there is that moment of like genuine happiness and levity, because it is that moment for the viewer to breathe and just to say like, okay, in this moment, regardless of what you think is going to happen after this, at least here they have each other and they've experienced this beauty.
Yeah.
I think you're right. And look, I will also say that as a film that establishes this like staid baseline, the sort of transcendental style in film baseline, because I think strictly speaking, these ruptures are what Schrader would call not transcendental style, but like transcendence on film, which he sort of draws a distinction between them. But I agree with you, Matthew. For me, I don't know, not to get too romantic myself, but if you've been alive in the world, there are certain moments that feel like beyond real, that feel ecstatic, that feel like, the emotions are so heightened that to compare it to say like, oh, I was happy then. Well, I wasn't happy. I was like, something beyond that, something sublime, something more. And again, I think my favorite by far is still the Magical Mystery Tour in First Reformed, but I like the other 2. I like the card counter, and I like this moment here, because they're still trying to indicate that these things exist in most people's lives. Hopefully, I wish for people that they have these things, and they are ruptures of a kind. And again, even though I don't think the setup is as perfect for me, I think it's a good instinct, formally speaking, that I support.
I think that's very well put, both of you. Do we have any final thoughts? Any stray?
This might, I don't, as far as time or whatever, but kind of something that we've been dancing around, and I feel like is very easy to just kind of assume, because it does seem obvious, but I wanted to see, how do you guys feel about reading the film as the Book of Genesis?
I mean, Schrader talks about this. I have a bit of an interview here. He says, gardening is the oldest metaphor there is. We were born in the garden, and then a snake showed up and we were thrown out. It's the most primal metaphor of humankind. What I was drawn to as an occupational metaphor was the fact that it can be seen in 2 different ways. At the beginning of my career, I was able to get some mileage out of what you perceive of as a taxi driver and what I thought was actually there. It's the same thing we have here with the gardener. You perceive him as a caring steward of horticultural life, but as his former boss said, we're gardeners, we pull out the weeds, meaning we pull out the black people. I think it's there. I will say it's consistent with how I feel about the movie generally, which is that there are a lot of very interesting ideas raised by it. I don't think that they cohere as well as I would like them to, and I think we're picking at the like all these different things and getting a lot out of them upon reflection and upon discussion, but I don't know. Watching the film, I didn't feel like this was like a beautiful Swiss clock where all of these avenues are thoroughly explored or even like brought up to that they were like explored satisfactorily, I guess. Okay. So the metaphor is there, but I don't really know what we get from it and how it applies with the racism of it all. Like it's because I don't know that Schrader would say that like God is a racist old white lady.
Right.
But
that's what I was gonna say. Yeah.
Maybe he would. I don't know. But Ian, what about you?
Yeah, some of the clock avenues don't totally work. I think there is in the film the transition from like we could call it the leaving the garden or like kicked out of the garden moments, which obviously doesn't, like you're saying, Jake, doesn't totally track unless there's an objection about like God as a racist tyrant, jealous tyrant. But from then on, I'm a little bit softer on the film. Again, I think it's like so much better than a film that I would just watch on any given day, that I think it's like crazy the way that it was treated. But I think the second half kind of falls apart for me a little bit in terms of like how it's, like you're saying, Jake, putting together all these pieces and like what it's offering exactly, particularly in the conclusion where they return to the garden and they're sort of like insisting on their place back in this flawed paradise or something, which I think the closing shot I don't love because it sort of maybe is a kind of visual thing that like points out the lack of resolution or even like the intentional non-resolution of First Reformed or something, right? So it's sort of this in-between place of like, am I supposed to feel that this is satisfactory, like you're saying, Jake, or am I supposed to feel that this is uncertain and broken,
unresolved,
unresolved, exactly? So I don't know. I didn't hate the ending or anything. I just feel like it. The first half is like a Swiss clock to me a little bit, and I think that except for a few maybe minor missteps, works really really well. And then I think the film sort of maybe needed to be thought out a little bit more, or I don't know what would it require. But
Swiss clock guy's probably racist.
Almost definitely. Yeah. Matthew, what do you think about this conceit?
All of that makes perfect sense to me. I guess I like when someone doesn't try to make like perfect analogies or take something and like adapt the entirety of it, but is able to be inspired and take bits and pieces. So I like the playfulness of like, okay, well, what if God is a racist old Southern white woman, but you still have to, which I mean, in more Old Testament thinking, I mean that's not that far off.
No,
yeah, I guess.
I
mean,
as
far as like the vengeful God,
angel of death with a Luger type of a situation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There is that very like you have to do by my asking, or else I will be unhappy with you, and that's the last thing you want. Like so, like even when Norma asks Narvel, will you take Maya as an apprentice? She's not asking him. And he even says, like, what do you want me to say?
Yeah, how would you like me to respond?
How would you like me to respond? Yeah. And then she's like, I want you to say yes, which is not like, I would really be happy if you said yes, but like, you're going to say yes. I just want to make you think that it's your choice, But I think what's really interesting is how Schrader then uses Maya as both Eve and the temptation itself, because like, here is this person who is immediately put into this very intimate space with Narvel, and as this beautiful young woman, like there is that immediate temptation, and then to have her become at the end for Narvel to say like we're going to live as man and wife,
right,
it is very very interesting. Like, which I didn't take for him to say like we're getting married, but for him to be like, we're fucking.
Uh-huh.
Like,
yeah.
Like we're not just cohabitating.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, as you pointed out, like we don't see the fucking there. We see them standing nude next to each other as Adam and Eve are often depicted. There's no like they're not already on a bed like ripping some of their clothes off, you know.
Exactly.
Yep.
And so like that just, you know, but I think the most important part is the return, because it's the thing that Adam and Eve never got to do. And so here the paradise is a broken garden. And so I think this also just speaks to the hope of the entire film of like, this entire garden is in shambles. This paradise is no longer paradise. And you're no longer asking for God's favor or permission just for another chance, which is all that Maya and Narvel ask for. And so like it really, so not having like a strict resolution or like a very clearly defined one, I think for me that does speak to it being more, I don't know, realistic.
Yeah, and I do like I said, this sort of like speaking up against God. I mean, one of her final lines is like, you know, that's obscene, I think I mentioned, and Narvel says, no, it isn't.
No, it isn't.
So sort of like, speaking
so
in the
powerful.
same sort of like biblical terms of like, it is not obscene. Like you're just the way that you are defining this in this authoritarian fashion is not correct. And I'm going to refute that. But yeah, I also agree that I like a half-interpreted metaphor.
Sure.
I don't require a one-to-one mapping, and in fact, that often is more boring. So I think that's true.
Borges defeated.
Yes.
Couple stray thoughts. I think the fact that she calls him Sweet Pea reminds of Mendelian
the pea plants.
Sure. Yeah.
Genetics, that's where a lot of eugenics came from. Is like based on like that was a sort of I believe Gregor Mendel's research on genetics was kind of like ignored in his time and then was sort of rediscovered later.
Co-opted.
Yeah, one of those weird historical things where like nobody cared about this at the time, but it became very important to people like decades or centuries later.
Maybe she thinks that he's kind of nitrogen fixing in the garden, you know, kind of a positive influence.
I think he is. Yeah. And then also Schrader has gone on the record as saying that S.I. Morales in this film is actually the entity from Mission Impossible.
That's very interesting. I thought S.I. Morales was great, and he has like 20
spooky.
lines.
He's a spooky guy. I think he's a Scientologist. So that's probably
perfect.
why he's so good at being spooky.
I also like the casting of the dork. What is that guy? I think I have only known him from the brief period that I watched The Flash. No, the actor's name is Rick Cosnett, the replacement of S.I. Morales, the cop. Who
yeah.
Who was like,
I thought it was
just funny.
I thought it was fun that Victoria Hill from First Reformed is back and gets to be kind of
Isabel, right?
A softened, earthy,
Isabel, exactly,
garden lady, and she also gets to be Australian here.
It's true. No, it must have wonderful.
Must have been weird for her to be using her real accent and Joel Edgerton not to be.
That I thought about it. Yeah,
confusing.
I think we may have even talked about this with Gerard Butler.
Yeah, it's so weird when Joel Edgerton. When you hear him speaking Australian because he does it so little,
so rarely. I can't remember the last time I heard him use his actual voice.
Yeah, I was listening to a panel with Schrader and Weaver and Edgerton, and it's like, why is he talking?
Does he keep doing that? Yeah.
Also, for some reason, her wig had a widow's peak that Sigourney Weaver doesn't actually have. So I don't know what's going on with that, but I'm sure Schrader has an explanation from some like painting or whatever. And she looks great. My famous podcast girlfriend wanted me to point out that Sigourney is 73 years old in this film.
I was like, how much of a May-December romance? Because that's also Schrader said, like, well, it's 2 May-December romances or something. And I thought, they don't even feel that age inappropriate to me because she looks so good.
Yeah. Sure. All right. Any final thoughts before we turn to our sexual obsession check-in?
Go for it.
So earlier this year, when talking about his upcoming film Non Compos Mentis, Paul Schrader had this to say:
I've never written a script about sexual obsession, and so that's the one I'm doing now.
So, yeah, we don't get enough of that.
Yeah,
it's good that we finally
I love that so much.
Should be the feeling.
One of the last episodes. Yeah, it's insane. So throughout the filmography, we've been endeavoring to catalog which of Schrader's films are not about sexual obsession, and the number, I think we should do a thorough accounting.
A tally. Yep.
But I think we're at, it's pronounced Italy, by the way. I think we're at about half and half. But I put it to you, fellers, is this film about sexual obsession? I'll go first.
Okay.
I think, like many of these Schrader films, sexual obsession is animating a number of the characters in the film, but not the plot, I would say. But like, Sigourney clearly has a sexual obsession with Narvel, and her obsession with control of him, I think, is sexual in nature. But I think he, like so many of the men in Schrader films, is like beyond sex in a way. He's sexually obsessed with grace and
right.
absolution. Yeah. So I would say no, soft no.
Matthew,
I think the energy is always there. And like even from the first interaction between Narvel and Norma, and then obviously the first interaction with Narvel and Maya, that like there is that charge and that tension. And so I think in the same way that, you know, whether it's Calvinists or like any other form of Christianity, especially, where that sexual energy, it's not like we're pretending that it doesn't exist. It's just like you're trying to force it into something else.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's like love for Jesus or like love for whatever, or like,
right,
you know, godly things that, like, you know, just like the example I always think of is like, you know how people say that like the Victorians were like the biggest prudes or whatever. And it's like, if you look at like any Victorian literature, it's actually the opposite. It's like, talking about not doing something is the same as
intensely,
it's the same
aggressively
as talking
about it. Yeah.
Right.
So
Age
it's like
of Innocence type stuff.
Yeah, like you're showing. Yeah, no, Age of Innocence is perfect.
Like, great comparison.
You know, you don't have to show it or you don't have to mention it directly to say that it's there. In the same way that you could say that about faith or like anything like that. And so, I guess like for Master Gardener, I guess it kind of is. Like, and I think especially when you have a scene like that fantasy scene being such a release, not just for the characters, but for the film itself, it's kind of like that union between Narvel and Maya is what everything has been really building towards. And because we have an understanding of Narvel's submissiveness, that like, whether it's, I guess like it is as indirect as everything else in the film that we've discussed is indirect, which means to say it is exactly what the film is about. Whether it's American racism or these gender dynamics or forgiveness being possible, like all of that. It's, yeah, I would say, so maybe that's a half yes or a 150% yes. I don't know. But
sure.
Yeah.
I
like this.
I think I'm with Matthew. Yeah, I think soft yes is how I describe myself, because as much as the film is about anything, that's yeah, don't you dare.
H, yes, paler and plumper.
Yes,
that's the last.
Yeah. I think this is what it's about. You know, as one of the things it's about, and like you're saying, Age of Innocence style. I think that's a great way to think about it. I do think, didn't comment on it, but having a crush on your teacher is like the most human thing in the world, because any good teacher is being extremely patient and sharing and like
and listening.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
in the
Ian,
how do you make a living?
Yes. No, this is why I want to articulate it. That's why I'm saying having a crush on your teacher is the most normal thing in the world. A teacher having a crush on their students is like the most insane thing in the world, because it is very close to, regardless of the age of your students. You are treating them as you treat a child, which is like not as somebody who you think of somebody who can like, I mean, good teachers are taught by their students, et cetera, but there's like a huge power imbalance. So to see that as like something erotic, I think is very strange to me.
It's it's a bit of a disorder.
Yeah.
I'd say one's brain is disordered.
Yes, I would say that.
Sense.
Yeah.
That's the official position of this podcast. Matthew, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh my God, thank you.
This was excellent.
Very enriching.
Just what the film needed.
My soil is full of nutrients. My intellectual soil is deeply
dense with moisture.
Mm-hmm. You're mulching this guy.
Yeah. And like Narvel in the garden, I got my little tootsies out, rolling them in the intellectual. Oh yeah, and I'm shoving it in my face, getting my face all dirty. Huffing dirt.
Look, I can't make fun of that because I've both done that in workshops and asked people to do that. So that was the kind of thing that,
it did look like really healthy dirt. So
it looked good. Matthew, if folks want to check out more of the Matthew Germenis goodness, where should they turn?
So I'm on Letterboxd, of course, just at Germenis, as we established with my email address, very direct. And
he's giving it away, folks.
Yeah, I'll let you figure it out. So just email me, whatever you want. And then I've written, some stuff for Brightwell Darkroom, which, really proud of, this essay on DiCaprio and the Western, which you can find, and currently working on a book chapter on Clint Eastwood and music. So that'll be published sometime in the spring.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, so just that. Really just simple. Yeah, Google my name. Any of the stuff I've written is up there, and nothing bad. So
great.
Yeah.
Hey, that's about as ideal as it can get.
We will be closing the episode with you doing a full rendition of Walt Kowalski's Gran Torino, just to take people out. So
yeah. And also maybe Don't Fence Me In from Clint Eastwood's early album of cowboy songs.
Or what's it? Yes. Bar Buddies, Drinking Buddies. What's the name?
Beers to You. Beers to You, the duet between Clint and Ray Charles from the opening credits of Any Which Way You Can.
I was going to play Doe Eyes on kazoo, but I guess those are better.
Wow.
So,
yeah. There you go. Yeah. There you go. Doesn't he rhyme like Breeze Blow with Gran Torino or something? As for us, remember to subscribe, rate us, write a review. Helps us on the algorithm. If you like the show, tell a friend, tell your dad, get a tattoo. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Podcasty for me. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, you're interested in co-hosting a 2-person Paul Schrader podcast, you're shit out of luck, basically, although he's got more movies coming out. But email us at podcastyforme@gmail.com. All of this is at podcastyforme.com and shootingyourselfinthehead.com. Thank you to Jeremy Allison for our artwork. Next week, I think we should do a bit of a Schrader recap. I think we should do a little final thoughts on this era of Schrader. We'll be covering Juror number 2 as soon as Ian can see it in Mexico.
Yep. Which
we'll be covering
we're hoping
Canada.
will be in the next few weeks, but probably is entirely possible it will be when it's out on VOD for the world to see.
Which is probably where most people will see it anyway. We'll be covering O Canada. We might have some exciting surprise stuff. We got some irons in the fire. Mm-hmm. And then after that, we'll take a little break, and then we'll launch into our next project, which I can tease now. Ian gently shot down my idea to cover the films of the famous animal actor Bart the Bear. So it's not that. But I did text him about this.
The list is short. Once Bart the Bear's off it, there's just not that much left.
Look up Bart the Bear's filmography and then email podcastyforme@gmail.com with the subject line, Ian is wrong. So it would be so good.
Yeah.
And with that, that's our episode on The Master Gardener. We will see you very soon. Until then.
Bye.
Bye.
Until then,
play.
Bye.